Okay, hi. So one of the actually most asked questions I've gotten, and a bunch of them came in the last couple of months, but over the last year, I would say also. So I'm going to finally get to another video and answer this question because because of the high demand, or let's say for me high demand. It's not that many questions. Is about athlete readiness, and can NIRS help us identify athlete readiness? And I think that there is a lot of signal there. And because of some projects I'm doing at the university that I've done and that I'm starting up again in next year in 2021, which kind of covers this topic about readiness, I thought it would be a good video to do, and to get the information out there that NIRS does seem to be useful to assess athlete readiness. So I'm going to look at two specific studies, and I'll talk about some data that I collected about this. The first one's by Ahmadi and colleagues. And this is a graph that I put up here. So essentially they did isometric contractions tests on multiple days, and they did a heavy eccentric contraction workout. So they did a really hard, high-intensity workout using eccentric contractions. And they did a pre-post, and then every consecutive day for 7 days, these isometric contractions to test oxygen, so NIRS kinetics, your muscle oxygenation kinetics or dynamics. And they tested resting values as well. And so what we have here are actually resting values in front of us, because this is often asked, can I use my resting value for anything? And the one thing that I do think resting value is useful for is your resting value different today than it was yesterday, and did I do a hard workout in between then? And it seems to be the case, as we see with the data here, that hard workouts result in increased resting values. And so we see this with the pre and post, that you have this elevated resting value. Now it remains elevated actually over the whole week in the data that we see here. So the O2 sat stays elevated over the whole week if we look at where it is in the pre-test. So your resting oxygen saturation will be elevated because as a consequence of high intensity work. And it'll come down and normalize as you recover. Now that's during rest. And what happens during actual exercise? So this is another graph from Ahmadi. What happens is that the ability to extract oxygen in the muscle decreases after this heavy eccentric work. So there's probably some kind of muscle damage, micro trauma going on. There's probably less neurological firing. So overall, there's less metabolism, and you're using less oxygen, and that shows in the muscle oxygen extraction, which you see here. So the change in your deoxygenated saturation is after your exercise, after the heavy eccentric work, much lower, and it remains lower for multiple days afterwards. So doing an isometric test results in a 40% change in your muscle oxygenation, and after your eccentric work, you're only getting a 20% change. And after a whole day's recovery, you're still only getting about 28% change. And even after that whole week, you still haven't actually gotten back up to the 40% change that you had before. So there's eccentric work can leave a lot of damage for a long period of time. We know that, and this is kind of shown here. What also happens is that the rate of your recovery of your oxygen saturation is also decreased, or at least in this study. So the rate of oxygen recovery is decreased after this heavy eccentric work. Exactly. And your rate of deoxygenation is also decreased. So the kinetics and the values themselves get altered by doing heavy work, and they can remain altered over multiple days. So somehow having an idea of where you stand when you use your NIRS device, what are my resting values, what are my muscle oxygen minimum values, for simplicity's sake, but what also are my rates of change and my rates of recovery, my rates of deoxygenation and reoxygenation, and have they changed as a result of my workout? helps you identify if a day after a heavy workout if your system's recovered or not. To bring this maybe a little bit closer to like a real life situation instead of these kind of artificial eccentric works is an article by Giovannelli, I believe that's his name, and colleagues. I hope I'm not mispronouncing that. And they actually did a similar thing, but they did pre-post tests, and in between these athletes did a real-life race. They did trail running, and what they got is, first of all, in the post-test, there was a lower VO2 in liters per minute, which is what we see here. They have a decreased oxygen consumption at a systemic level. And what we see with your change in deoxyhemoglobin, so your extraction rate as measured by NIRS, is that you also have overall a much lower extraction rate. Now, in both cases, obviously, performance is also lower. It's going to be the case because they're tired, but that is likely also a result of this inability to extract oxygen. Again, now they don't have this over multiple days afterwards. It's just a direct post. But we'd assume, if we take the information from Ahmadi before, that this could remain decreased, or this change could remain over multiple days, depending how hard the effort was. Now, at the university myself, and both of these authors argue that this kind of muscle trauma, muscle damage taking place through the eccentric work, including the trail running, which has a lot of this eccentric work in it as well from downhill running. What does this look like for isometric or concentric contractions? Now, we just did data collection with climbers, which is highly isometric contractions, and we had very similar results. So first of all, we also had, after a heavy climbing specific workout, first of all, the resting values in the forearm flexors, so the muscles being activated, were elevated, and they remained elevated 24 hours later. And during an isometric contraction test, you had a change in the ability to desaturate. So we had the muscle oxygenation value minimums were higher after, and they remained elevated. Now, what was important in the work that we did was that the correlator for performance and minimal muscle oxygenation, that's been shown to be the case. So ability to extract is correlated with VO2, for example. That wasn't so clear with these forearm muscle measurements. But the change in the minimum, so how much change you had in your ability to extract, that was very well correlated with a change in performance. So a change in your SMO2 min was correlated with loss in performance. And this remained over longer periods. We did 24-hour post-test as well. The idea here is that the most important part is understanding how your NIRS pictures look, how your muscle oxygenation values are at rest and under load for you or for your athlete, and then being able to see how that changes. The change in these values become the relevant part in assessing if your athlete's ready or not. So you need to have pre-data to assess post-data. And that can surely, or I would argue, can surely help you on assess athlete readiness. Okay. Thank you for listening. I hope that helped, because I think it's a very interesting topic. I think there's a lot more to be done here for sure.